Hello and welcome to the Blueprint Roundtable. I'm your host, Chrissy Manzano, joined by Matt Lors and Emily Bell today. The Blueprint Roundtable is an ongoing series with our team and occasional guests. In each session, we ask the team a simple question related to trends in recruiting, talent, and go-to-market for discussion and debate. This week's question is moving from a manager role to an individual contributor role a red flag?
I
What are your thoughts?
I can take that one. For me, no, and I've done it multiple times throughout my career. I think it does give a lot of hiring managers pause. A lot of times, I hear from clients that they want to know why did the person step down from leadership back to IC, or why are they trying to get into leadership after not having been in leadership for years. A lot of times, there's assumptions made that it's due to lack of performance or lack of ability to perform at that level. But in reality, I think there's a bunch of individuals that have a similar background to myself, where depending on the stage of career I'm at, it's more advantageous sometimes for me to step back to an IC in a new organization, to move back into leadership, or frankly, earnings potential is a big driver, and
Yeah.
work-life balance can also come into place. Emily, I know I'm covering a lot of things there. Hopefully I'm not taking too much of your thunder, but I don't.
I'm just over here nodding. I'm agreeing with all of it. I think it's
I don't see
all
it as a red
very
flag.
spot
I
on.
think the question deserves to be asked, but if you don't have that conversation, then you'll never know. You have to give an individual the opportunity to explain it, right? As somebody myself who has 2 kids under 4, I don't know if I could lead a large team right now. I just don't think I have the bandwidth. My personal life interferes way too much, and that's not fair to those individuals that would lean on me. So I'm perfectly fine being in an IC role, even though I've been a leader at multiple points in my career, and I aspire to get back into leadership. And I'm happy to have that conversation. But as a hiring manager, you have to be willing to have that conversation with the candidate. You can't just make assumptions that it's due to lack of performance or motivation or other things.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think about it too. I mean, especially when you look at the workforce as a whole, I think just speaking from the millennial point of view, we're very much kind of we're kind of exiting the early end, and we're now getting into kind of the thick of the middle of our careers. And that means a lot of us have gotten married and we've had children. So the career trajectory of the first part, right, can change depending on priorities. So I totally understand. And I always joke, when you're in leadership, you're one bad hire away from not hitting OTE. And so, and it really is that simple. So especially from a sales perspective, it totally makes sense why some people would take a step back, especially, and that's not just for the millennial generation, the workforce. I think it applies to across all generations currently working today. But I think it's have the conversation, chat with the individual. I think the question I would want to know is if they stepped out, why do they want to go back in? And really wanting to understand the why behind that. And so I think it's not necessarily a red flag, but if they're leaving an organization as an IC and they're wanting to go to a new organization as a leader, I would have some questions around skill set and how they would approach leading a team again versus if they had basically been at an organization, left and was still an IC within the new organization and then worked their way to a leadership position again. Like that path would seem not necessarily more palatable, but it would make more sense and they would have more recent leadership experience. Like that would really be the biggest question is how long ago were they leaders?
Yeah.
Because things change very quickly in tech. So also said a lot, but Chrissy, I'd love to hear your thoughts, just kind of how you would approach it.
I agree with you all. I guess there's like a follow-up question to this, and is why are people so quick to like assume that this is, I mean, we've heard it from folks before, oh, it's a huge red flag. Like why, and I have some thoughts around this, but just like kind of throwing out another question, why do you think people just instantly are like, red flag, like no way, won't have the conversation?
I have thoughts. I mean, not necessarily controversial, but I mean, I think it's just not common. I think it's not always ego, right? But it's not typical when someone has worked very hard at something to accomplish something to take a step or a perceived step back, right? When we all know that as an IC in sales, you can in a lot of times surpass OTE of leadership depending on hitting accelerators. So I think it's just kind of the perception of it versus it being actually real. And I think if you remove ego away from it and looks at the facts, I think in a lot of ways it shows a very self-aware individual
Yeah.
that has a lot of the things that you want in a really good leader, that
Yeah.
understands what they can take on and what they can't, and is able to balance things. I mean, that's really what you want in a leader anyway. So I think if anything, it lends towards, the right behaviors. It's just removing the ego, removing the perception of what that means typically or has traditionally meant, and really talking to the individual and kind of getting a feel for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll project a little bit based on conversations I've had in the last couple of years. I think there's more junior leaders or hiring managers, for lack of a better term, that don't want somebody that sat in their seat before because they don't have all the answers and they're not going to be comfortable answering tough questions from somebody who sat in the seat before. And so I think they feel, some of them, again, I'm projecting, but I feel that some more junior managers feel, well, this person may be contentious with me because they're going to ask questions I don't have the answers to, and I wouldn't share with them if I had them. And then the other part I think is another projection again. I think there's certain people out there that see, oh, they're stepping back from leadership, so they're not taking their career as seriously. And I need, most of what we work for early stage tech startups. So they're like, I need hungry, motivated people that can just beat the drum 8 different ways in 8 different days, right? And it's, if somebody's stepping back from leadership back to an IC role, they're admittedly giving up a lot of responsibility managing others. So I think there's some concern from a certain aspect of the hiring manager pool out there that feels they're getting somebody who's burned out or who can't manage the high workload and can't, wear multiple hats anymore. But again, for me, you got to have that conversation and talk to the person and figure it out. If you start making those assumptions, then you're just, you're shutting down avenues before you'd have a chance to explore them. So
Yeah. No, totally. I mean, that point of like, you've got to have the conversation. And we always say that, right? And when you look at there's a lot of people that, so one, if you get to go into management, what you actually could normally assume is that you did really well in your IC role, right?
Mhm.
Even if there's things there, like going into management means like you were doing well.
Yeah.
There are people that are great ICs that should never be managers, right? And sometimes they go into that management role and they realize that. But guess what? Like now they actually see the full picture. I'll hire those people all day, every day, right?
Mhm.
Because that's one less adult that I have to, deal. I have 2 small children under 4 as well, or 4 under, yeah. And, I don't want to deal with anyone else and their stuff. And so they understand that full picture, right?
Yeah.
And I think also too, part of the reason people project a little bit is because they had an experience with someone that fit that mold. And I think it's really easy for us to go, okay, I don't want that to happen again. So instead of really looking at that person, I'm now going to apply this to everybody to keep myself safe, right? It's
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
protection response thing. And there's nothing wrong with that's just like a natural way for your mind to work. But this is where, unconscious systematic biases come into play, right? And you have to go, okay, hold on. I can't say that everyone that's come from that experience is going to be bad. That person, if we actually look into why they weren't good, it was probably had nothing really to do with them being a manager going to IC. Probably was a lot of other things. And there's so many people that do that, right? There's not one way, I think we look at career, and Emily, you said this, as linear, right? Of just, or of moving this, that's not how it is. People change and figure out what they want to do all the time. And I think especially since COVID, where so many people lost their jobs and realized they can live off of a lot less than they realized, people are like, hey, I want to be happy.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different avenues to that, especially now with remote work or contract work, all those types of things. So,
Yeah.
but
I think it's also, there's so many more current day dual income households
yes.
where it's just not the way that it used to be. So having children looks very different compared to
Yes.
probably even our parents' generation. So you have to make decisions in your career that aren't always linear, because it allows for, I mean, a job is basically a means to live your life, if anything, and you can be lucky enough to work and make money doing something that you're super passionate about. But for most people, it's a means to live your life. So it's great to have drive and career, but I think it's really, there's more and more emphasis on balance because the family units look so different. There's not going to always be a stay-at-home parental unit, and you have to make those calls based off of, even if you have the skills to advance your career in various ways, you still at the end of the day have to make sure that it's all balanced from a family perspective as well. So I think that's something also to be mindful of, especially if you look at women in leadership. Like, you have to be willing to kind of understand that people just have to make different choices than what they've traditionally made. Not to make a complete broad stroke and assumption that it's like that for everybody, but I think that that's part of it too. It just looks different. The work climate and environment looks different than it used to. So different decisions are made.
Yes, change is hard, but it's not bad. We have to
Yeah.
evolve, right? What did they say? Cavemen used to drag women by their hair. So, evolution is not a bad thing. So,
Yep.
and we're at a turning point in our society. All right, you all, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining the Blueprint Roundtable. Until next time, we'll see you later.
Bye, guys.